You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network.
You're listening to the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition, your source for all news, press conference reactions, analysis, and objective discussions regarding the NHL's Buffalo Sabres from right here in the Niagara region. Here are your hosts, Brandon Caputo and Austin Broad.
How's it going, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another installment of the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition, right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network, your July 29th, 2020 edition, your source for North American sports coverage by sports fans, for sports fans, delivered to you right here from the good old Niagara region. Follow the podcast on Twitter at Armchair GM Pod. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/the Armchair GMs Network. Listen to us live. Usually we're offline today on Spreaker.com by searching the Armchair GMs. As well, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, CastBox, and Deezer. So we're on all those different platforms for you. If you have them, check them out at Armchair GM's Network. As well, check out our brand new website, up-to-date website, armchairgmsports.com. All of our articles, all of our podcasts, all of our sponsors are on there. Please go and check that website out. Everything you need to know regarding the Armchair GMs is on that website. As well, this show's Twitter account at AGM Sabres Pod. We're getting that up and going, so please, for Sabres news, follow that Twitter account, AGM Sabres Pod. As always, I'm one of your hosts of the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition, Cappy. Follow me on Twitter at Caputs13 of the Canadian Zed, and I'm always very pleased to be joined by my co-host for the Sabres portion of the network. He is Austin Broad. You can follow me on Twitter at Austin_Broad. Austin, we're back with a Sabres episode. It's been a little while now, and you know what? I'm happy to be talking about the Sabres. The return to play format for the NHL is coming back with playoff hockey. We're not in it, but we've got some stuff to talk about today, mostly regarding the 8th overall selection, and finally going to talk about some Sabres stuff here.
Yeah, it's been a while, probably about a month since we last talked, and yeah, hockey's coming back. I was talking to my buddy earlier. I'm still not fully excited about hockey yet. We'll see what happens Saturday when the games actually mean something, but after watching Montreal play, I'm kind of glad the Sabres aren't in it because Montreal looked absolutely terrible, and well, we're pretty close to even with them, so it's a good thing we're not in it right now.
That one damn game, if we would have played Montreal the night after the league was shut down, if we would have won that game, we would have been in the 24th spot and had a chance at Alexis Lafreniere after getting waxed by the Pittsburgh Penguins, but you know, that hindsight 2020 in that scenario. Who knows? Montreal, you know what? With the Sabres' luck, the Sabres would have passed Montreal for the 8th spot or for the 24th spot in the playoffs, and then Montreal would have won the draft lottery with Buffalo's pick that they would have had. So that would have happened most likely.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised at all if that happened.
Yeah. First off, I want to give a shout out to Ivan from Guitar Logic for that great Sabres Dance cover intro. That is the new intro song for the Sabres Dance. For the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition. Great. Go check him out on YouTube, Guitar Logic, and shout out to our good buddy Brad Best for his great intro of our shows and all of our shows on the network. So a lot of interesting, cool new things for you guys to listen to here on the network. And let's jump right into this Sabres talk, Austin. Obviously, the draft lottery happened. We did a pre-draft lottery show discussing, possibilities of Sabres moving up. They did nothing of that. They ended up being in the worst spot possible, the last team to miss the playoffs. So the 25th team, and then not only did they miss the playoffs, they ended up dropping a spot in the draft lottery to a team that is in the playoffs in the return to play format. So they will be picking 8th, which is a common area for the Sabres to be picking 7th and 8th over the last, seems like, decade.
Yeah, picking 7th and 8th is not where you want to be because that's literally just a middling team. You're not good enough to make the playoffs, and you're not bad enough to warrant a top 2-3 pick. So, yeah, perfect. Not a really good spot to be picking. This year might be a little different because this is a pretty loaded draft in terms of forwards. But, yeah, the lottery It's sad because they ended up dropping a spot, but that was actually ended up being mathematically the most likely situation for the Sabres, was dropping a spot. So of course that's what happened to them, because when do the numbers ever work in Buffalo's favor? Rasmus Dahlin aside, it just seems to be that's literally what happens to Buffalo all the time. Is you're not good enough to win the lottery and you end up picking 7th or 8th, and for the most part they've missed on their 7th and 8th overall picks.
Yeah, Rasmus Ristolainen really comes to mind there, but also Casey Middlestat comes to mind. Mikhail Grigorenko was around that area as well. That was a disaster. I believe that was around 10th or so was Grigorenko. If I'm just off the top of my head here, but they've had picks around that area. Ristolainen really is the good one, and obviously Dylan Cousins last year with the 6th overall pick was a nice one as well. So but like you said, it's been more misses than hits as of late. Alex Nylander is another one that comes to mind as well. So the Sabres, hopefully with the new regime, that's another thing we can quickly discuss here. Obviously, we went over the Kevin Adams hire and the firing of Jason Botterill, but there's going to be basically a brand new scouting staff as well. So, Austin, what do you think of that possibly changing some things for the Sabres and maybe giving you a little bit more optimism than you would have in previous years where you say, oh, it's the same scouting staff, so I don't really, we have our doubts about them. But what do you think of basically a whole new staff coming in here and Kevin Adams having a clean slate? And we mentioned on the pre-show prep, we were talking off air, that they basically have 7 months here to prep for this draft. And you know what? Even though it's a new staff, I mean, I think 7 months is a good enough, gauge to see what prospects are the good ones, what ones are not. You're usually got like maybe less than a month if you're not a playoff team to figure out what's going on with the prospects, but now with this added time, it seems like there's a lot more pressure and a lot more expectation that they hit on this pick if they use it.
Yeah, so I mean, I've heard it's been pretty optimistic about the new scouting staff. They're going to go through a bit more of a hybrid approach, it seems like. Video scouting is going to be a little bit more relied on, which could be good, could be bad. I don't know. What I'm more interested to see is the strategy that the new staff takes towards the draft, because Botterill's strategy was, aside from the 8th overall picks, because it's a little different, but in the second round, usually even in the third round, he was kind of how do I put this? I'm not even going to sugarcoat it because he's not the GM anymore. He went safe. He would pick low ceiling, high floor defensemen like Matthias Samuelsson, Ryan Johnson, and skip over players like Arthur Kaliev, Akil Thomas, players that have a way higher offensive ceiling but have a bit of a chance of busting. So he didn't draft well with in the second and third rounds, and that's kind of where you also need to hit on your top picks. That's obvious, but the reason the LA Kings have the best prospect pool is because they've been able to get prospects like Akil Thomas and Arthur Kaliev in the second and third rounds. Botterill didn't do that, so hopefully Kevin Adams will take some swings when he gets to the middle rounds of the draft. And just because a player might be a little bit more likely to bust, but he has a higher offensive ceiling, doesn't mean you should avoid him. And I think that will go a long way to at least seeing the Sabres drafting, become a little better. I mean, they're going to miss. You're going to miss a lot. That's what the draft is. You miss a lot, but you only miss if you take swings. So hopefully they start taking some swings and draft some players that can actually have a elite potential in the future.
And there's also been criticism with Botterill about, wanting to draft the American and European skaters over the Canadian Hockey League players, just for the fact of the leverage. And, maybe now that he's out of there, we won't have to worry about not drafting any CHL players. I mean, I know he did draft Dylan Cousins is going to be the last pick on his first-round pick on his resume with the Sabres, but he's been very much against drafting CHL players with those top picks during his tenure with the team.
Yeah, I mean, there's some debate between people on whether he was consciously doing that or, just kind of it was a coincidence. I think he was consciously doing it because he was on the record saying that, European guys and college players, you possess their rights a little bit longer. But, we'll see how the new strategy works. I mean, obviously, the CHL is still widely considered one of the best developmental leagues in terms of NHL draft talent. I mean, how many Lafreniere, Quentin Byfield, those guys, they come out of this league, the CHL. So, avoiding it is not a good draft strategy. So I'm hopeful. I mean, I've heard Kevin Adams say all the right things so far. We'll see if how many times do GMs say all the right things though. So we got to see him put them into play and actually live by what he says. But right now, I think it's just because we've been off for so long that I'm kind of become numb that, I'm actually starting to get hopeful again for the Sabres. And I don't know if that's necessarily good or bad, but that's where I'm at. I'm starting to see a bit more positivity coming out of myself.
Yeah, just don't go back and watch the Pagula Zoom call. That was a nightmare. But so what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about options to do with the 8th overall pick. We're going to first of all discuss if they keep the pick, what players we're basically looking at with the 8th overall pick. We're going to go into a full draft episode later on in a month or two when right before the draft we'll go through the Sabres picks and who we believe when we have a full draft list and full prospect pool of what we're going to expect with all their picks that they have in this year's draft. But just for this video's sake, we're just basically here to give our initial reactions and thoughts to what to do with the 8th overall pick, who's there available for the Sabres, and what trade possibilities might be there as well if they choose to trade out of that spot. So, Austin, let's start off with if they use the pick. So if they do keep the pick and draft 8th overall, what are we looking at here? So I've got 3 draft boards up right now. I've got the NHL, Sportsnet, and Elite Prospects, and I'm just going to basically go over the 7th, 8th, and 9th spot. So the Sabres pick 8. I'll go over where the all 3 of these lists have 7, 8, and 9 projected, and we'll kind of base it off that. So with the NHL's list, as far as North American, they just have it sorted by European and North American skaters. So as far as North American skaters, they have in that spot with the 7, 8, 9, Jack Quinn, Caden Gooley, and Braden Schneider. With European skaters in that spot, they have, as the page is loading here, they've got Lucas Raymond, Amirov, and Anton Lindell. For Sportsnet list, they just have it combined with the 2 lists. So they have Jake Sanderson, the defenseman, Cole Perfetti at 8 from the Saginaw Spirit, and Alexander Holtz from the SHL, the right winger. And lastly, Elite Prospects has Cole Perfetti at 7, Tim Stutzel is somehow at number 8, and Jake Sanderson is at 9. What
was that last list?
This is EliteProspects.com. They have Lucas Raymond at number 3 and Tim Stutzel at number 8. I found that very, very interesting, which Stutzel seems like he's a slam dunk, like top 3 pick at this point, but Elite Prospects is very high on Lucas Raymond, and he's been one of the options that the Sabres have been eyeing as well. I know you've talked about him before on the show as well, so it looks like, after the first couple of picks there with Lafreniere and Byfield, you have the guys like Lucas Raymond, Marco Rossi, Jamie Drysdale, Alexander Holtz, Cole Perfetti, Tim Stutzel, Jake Sanderson. So what are you looking at most there from those guys in that spot? And realistically, with what the Sabres have in their prospect pool, what do you think is the most realistic option that they go with? Do they go for a position of need, or do they kind of just take the best player available in Kevin Adams' first draft?
So I have four situations. The fourth one is the not good situation, but I have the home run, like miracle, wish it would happen, and that would be somehow Marco Rossi falls to number 8. Don't see it happening, but if he's there, Kevin Adams, you sprint to that podium and you put down his name as fast as possible, because Marco Rossi should be a top 5 pick in this draft, but he's been projected anywhere from 5th to 9th. So I mean, there is a small possibility. That's my home run, can't miss. Would love it if it happened. The second one is the more realistic, and I think that's one of the 2 Swedish wingers in Lucas Raymond and Alexander Holtz, and I don't think you can miss on either one. I think no matter what, when you draft one of those 2 guys, you're not looking at an impact in the NHL probably until 2021 anyway, but I think either one of those 2 would be good. Raymond's the more skilled, like flashy player, where Alexander Holtz is that goal-scoring winger who I think will probably, when it's all said and done, will be between him and Perfetti. Those 2, I think it'll be Holtz. I think will be the best goal-scoring forward from the entire draft. The third situation is the one that people will hate, but will actually be a sneaky smart pick, kind of like the initial reaction to Dylan Cousins, and that's Anton Lindell. I think that kid's floor is a 45-point, top-notch, elite 2-way center. I think his ceiling is, this is a bad name to say around Buffalo, but his ceiling is a Ryan O'Reilly type player, which would just be, like he is a sneaky good pick at 8 if he's there. He doesn't have the flashiness or the hype that the other prospects have, but that would be a really good pick and a good indication that, Kevin Adams and his scouting staff are they're smart intuition, because they're looking at more than just offensive production from their prospects. And the fourth one, the nuclear option.
Sorry, I just want to update the listeners on where Anton Lindell is located on these draft boards. So for the NHLs, he's the number 4 ranked European skater. He's the 11th ranked skater overall for Sportsnet, and for Elite Prospects, he's number 10. So that's not a huge reach there. It's essentially basically a one or two spots down from where he's actually projected. So if the Sabres took him at number 8, it wouldn't be so much of a reach as some of these other guys on the list.
Yeah, and I just said Botterill's downfall was he drafted safe. Lindell at 8 would be a smart, safe pick, but when you're drafting a guy like Lindell, it's not bad to be safe, because I think Anton Lindell might be the most NHL-ready prospect in the entire draft. Like, I would expect him to have a really strong chance of slotting into an NHL lineup right away as a third-line center, if that's the route that the team who drafts him wants to go. That's how smart and good I think this kid is. I think his offensive impact will take a little bit of time to develop, but he is pro ready, and I think whoever drafts him is going to they're going to be really happy with what they have. And the last option would be if Kevin Adams takes Jamie Drysdale or Jake Sanderson if they're there at 8. I mean, they're good players, don't get me wrong, and I know you don't draft for need in the NHL, but when the top of the draft is this forward heavy, there's just no need to take a shot on a guy like Drysdale or Sanderson, no matter how good you think they are, because you don't need defensemen at this point in your prospect pool.
Yeah, if there's one thing that the Sabres do have, it's defensive depth, and they really need that. They really need the forward depth, so it wouldn't really make sense to take Drysdale, although he would definitely be the best player available by far at number 8 if he was still available at that point. But I just think that there are way too many teams that could use a defenseman more than the Sabres with Jamie Drysdale, just with how loaded their top 6 looks like it's going to be, and with how bad their offensive production has been up front as of late. I think you bring up a good point about Sanderson too. I don't know if he's an option there as well, considering with all the other skilled forwards that are available. The interesting thing about Raymond and Holtz is they're both basically very young players playing in the Swedish Elite League, which is they're playing against men. So where Raymond doesn't have a lot of points playing for Frölunda, who that would come full circle, as Frölunda is the team that Rasmus Dahlin played on. So wouldn't that be interesting to have 2 Frölunda players, first round picks of the Sabres? But he only had 10 points in 33 games, but again, you can't really look at that because he's basically a teenager playing in a men's league. So for him to even compete at that level is something that you kind of have to look past the point total compared to some of these guys like Marco Rossi with 120 points for the Ottawa 67s, or even when you look down his line mate Jack Quinn with 52 goals with the Ottawa 67s. He's ranked number 16. So you kind of got to look past the point total, because when they're playing in the Swedish Elite League and the Finnish leagues and things like that, their point totals are going to be lower just because they're playing against men, not teenagers like in the OHL.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Alexander Holtz had some really solid production compared to Lucas Raymond, but when you look, you got to have a little bit of context. My buddy Walt, Sabermetrics on Twitter, he is a big European prospect guy. Lucas Raymond didn't really have a big role with Frölunda, whereas Holtz had a bit of a bigger role, so that's why you'll see the production kind of slip there. But yeah, I mean, when you're looking at the guys who produce in the OHL compared to the guys in Europe, it's insane. And look at Mika Zibanejad. I don't even remember how many points he had in his draft year, but not a lot. And now he's probably one of the most underrated stars in the NHL right now. So, Raymond or Holtz could be an absolutely great pick, and I don't think you can go wrong with either one if that's the route you're going to go. You're just going to have to be a little bit patient, and I know that's hard for Sabres fans, and that's why a lot of them are eager to try and trade that pick. But this year is not the year to trade the pick in my mind, because you're going to get a hell of a forward prospect at number 8.
So do you think, I mean, you mentioned that Lindell might be NHL ready. Is there anybody else on this list that the Sabres have a chance at drafting here that you think are going to be able to step in the start of the 2021 season? Or do you think that most of these guys, if they draft them, they're going to be at least another year away?
I think I think there's a few other ones. Like if Rossi is there at 8, I think he has a really strong chance of making the NHL, and he feels that way too because I don't know if it's confirmed, but I've seen rumors that if he isn't in the NHL next year, he's already pretty much agreed to sign in the Swiss Elite League. So he's not going to the AHL because he would have been eligible to do it. So he's either NHL or bust next year. I do think that you could carve out a nice role for him. I don't know if he'd be able to play center right away, but he would be a heck of a winger to have on your third line, maybe even your second line, depending on how your forward group looks. But it depends. I mean, I don't know if Perfetti's necessarily NHL ready, but there's always players who are going to surprise you. I mean, I would say that Rossi and Lindell would be the 2 best chance players at playing for the Sabres next year if they pick. Raymond, I just don't think is mature enough right now. I mean, another year in the SHL will do him wonders, as he'll probably have a huge role for Frölunda. Holtz, I think one more year over in Sweden would probably be the best way to go for him. So I think you're looking at either Lindell and maybe Rossi.
And looking at the prospect tracker for the Sabres, which is from the ChargingBuffalo.net, which is Austin is a contributor for the ChargingBuffalo.net. So this was a prospect tracker that they did. The top 5, and sorry if you can hear my dog in the background, he's very into the show. But the prospect tracker from the website. So Dylan Cousins is number 1. Matej Pekar, who we had the chance to interview during the season, is number 2. Brandon Biro is number 3. They just recently signed him back in April. Arttu Ruusalainen, the left winger from the Finnish Liga. And then Casey Middlestat is still on this list, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, at number 5, considered as a prospect. And that's a pretty big fall from grace for a guy that was ranked as the number 1 prospect in the NHL at one point during his draft year and coming out of basically the World Juniors. He won the MVP of the tournament. Obviously, his development hasn't been there much for the Sabres. He was sent down to Rochester this year, so another reach of a pick from Jason Botterill, who believed in him at the time. But looking at those top 5 there, they're all forwards, but for the Sabres, forward still seems to be the position that they're going to need to take, regardless or despite the fact that Cousins, Pekar, Biro, Ruusalainen, and Middlestat are all forwards themselves on the top 5 list.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at those guys, they are all forwards. I mean, Dylan Cousins aside, like I don't. People have already started to kind of worry about it because I think Botterill, before he left, kind of hinted that Cousins might be relied on next year. Don't worry about him being the same as Middlestat. I think Cousins' game translates a lot better to the NHL than Middlestat's does. He's a little bit more fine-tuned in the smaller, little tiny things that you might not notice. He's a really good two-way player. His doesn't rely strictly on speed and skill. Middlestat, who looked speed and skill, but he was also playing, high school hockey. He didn't look that good in Minnesota. I think people thought, myself included, thought he was a little bit better of a skater than he actually is. He's a super skilled kid, but he relies too much on his skill. We'll see what happens. I mean, I'm not fully ready to jump ship on him yet, but if Adams is able to find like an Alex Nylander type trade for him this summer, I wouldn't even bat an eye, because at this point, I think Middlestat is what he is, and that's a fringe second line player, more than likely to be a third line scoring player. Pekar is an interesting one. I am really bullish on him, but also at the end of the day, he's probably at best a third liner, but I think he's going to be a solid third liner. Biro, we don't know enough about, but I think that's a pretty good signing. I mean, anytime you're dipping into the college free agency pool, you're just hoping to find a diamond in the rough, and we'll see what happens with him. But yeah, it's the forward cupboard is really bare. I mean, when Pekar is one of your top ranked forward prospects, it's not necessarily a positive sign, and that's not a slight on Pekar at all, because at the end of the day, he is what he is, and that's going to be a pretty solid role player, but you don't want him being the second best forward prospect you have.
Yeah, other than Cousins at number 1, and he was recently ranked as the number 1 prospect. Again, the Sabres with these cursed number 1 prospects. Hopefully Cousins isn't the next casualty on that list, but the rest of them, it just seems like it's far-fetched to think that one of these guys might actually develop into something that's going to be very impactful for the Sabres other than bottom six forwards at this point, with Middlestad's development and, like you said, with Pekar, what he projects to be. Biro, we don't really know a lot about, and Russalainen, we'll have to see what happens when he comes over from Finland, but it still seems to me like they have to draft a forward regardless if their top 5 prospects are all forwards. And you know what? Going off of that, who would you want as basically your go-to option if he's there at 8, and your backup option if that one person is not available?
Well, I'll throw Marco Rossi aside because I honestly think he's not going to be there. So I've been really bullish on him, and I think he would actually just be perfect to pair alongside a guy like Jack Eichel in the future, and that's Alex Holtz. His goal scoring is just absolutely amazing. When you watch his shot, he has an NHL caliber shot. He is really good off the puck. He will pair well with any play driving center that they have. Right now, unfortunately, it's only Jack Eichel, but I think by the time he's ready, hopefully that number 2 center is taken care of. I think he'd be an absolutely excellent addition. And my backup is just Anton Lindell. How can you not want a guy who could probably step into your lineup as a third line center right away, and probably his floor going forward is a pretty solid two-way center who can get you 40 points. I mean, he might not be your second line center for the long-term future if he doesn't develop into his ceiling, but at worst you're getting a really good two-way center on your third line who is going to be able to produce some offense and help shut down the other team's best players.
And that's the elephant in the room too, is basically if the Sabres aren't competitive next year, does the captain Jack Eichel request to be traded? Does he want to leave if he's misses the playoffs for another year and continues his career of not being able to play postseason hockey with the top end elite, skill player that he is in the NHL, at most definitely a top 10 to 15 player in my opinion in the entire NHL. So he's not going to want to continue losing, although he's the captain with the big contract. But you bring in a guy like Anton Lindell to basically shore up that center ice position, which is your biggest position of need at this point. If Cousins is not ready to go next year, Lindell basically comes in there and helps out that center depth, which has obviously been their biggest problem since trading away Ryan O'Reilly. They don't have a number 2 center. They barely have a number 3 center at this point. Zemgus Girgensons is basically slotted in as the number 4 center with Johan Larsson, whoever they choose to play at center at that point with those two guys. But it just seems like the Sabres have a big hole to fill at the number 2 and 3 center spot, and you bring in a guy like Anton Lindell, maybe he can slide into that number 3 spot right away, and Cousins hopefully will be ready next year, if not the year after. Maybe they go out and trade for somebody to fill that number 2 spot and be a place filler for Cousins when he's finally ready. But I think Lindell is a nice pick there. Like you said, a very low-risk pick, and a guy that can basically be NHL ready next year if called upon.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the issue it's not even an issue. It's if that's the way they go, it's unfortunate for Dylan Cousins because I think next year, no matter what, he'll be in the NHL because let's face it, he has nothing to earn from going back down to junior, other than the fact that they might start on time, and the NHL is going to obviously be pushed back till the new year. But for Cousins, we'll see how the coach uses him. He could be thrust into that second line center role, but hopefully they'll start him on the wing and they'll find hopefully they'll find a stopgap, because if you have a guy like Jack Eichel, then I don't even know who. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head for a second line center. But if you have Jack Eichel, a proven center in the NHL, even if he's just a stopgap for a year or two, let's just say they go out and acquire a Dylan Strome, for example, that'd be great. You could have Eichel, Strome, potentially Lundell, and hopefully Larson if you bring him back. That's a pretty solid center group. And then you can slide Cousins to the wing because, like I said, I think it's pretty much a given that Cousins will probably get a shot at the NHL. But if they're smart, hopefully they'll just start him on the wing and they'll ease him in.
Yeah, or the wild, the wild prediction of possibly trying Sam Reinhart at center. That's never seemed to be a possibility with Ralph Kruger. So we'll have to see going forward with that. But you bring up a good point about Holtz. I mean, you have Victor Olofsson on the left side as a sniper for Jack Eichel, but you bring in a guy like Holtz as well. I mean, that's a pretty formidable top line there with the elite playmaking center in Jack Eichel to pair with 2 goal scorers like Olofsson and Holtz. I think that would be a very dynamic line if you could able to move Sam Reinhart down to the second line, or if he's a part of a trade down the road. But I think that's a very formidable top line there for the Sabres going forward if they decide to go that route.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love like I said, Holtz would be absolutely fantastic. I mean, a miracle would be Marco Rossi, because then you literally, when you look at it, you have Rossi and Cousins as 2 lottery tickets for a potential long-term second line center, plus any roster moves you might actually make to help shore up that position. But the more likely scenario would be Holtz or Raymond, and I think having a guy with Holtz's goal-scoring ability in that lineup, you already know Eichel works good with Olofsson, so you pair him with a similar type player like Alexander Holtz, and I think it's just it's already a proven recipe for success, so why not draft a player like Holtz?
Absolutely. So it seems like there's going to be a lot of good options there for the Sabres at 8. Some years you're looking at it and saying, the draft might not be the greatest, but this draft seems to be loaded in the top 10 with the very solid scoring wingers in the NHL, and the Sabres are definitely in need of some scoring wingers and some centermen as well if they're able to fall to them. So it looks like the Sabres are going to get a very good forward if they choose to take this pick. Like you said, worst case scenario, Jamie Drysdale falls and they take another defenseman for whatever reason, then they better go out and try to acquire some forwards at that point, but we'll cross that road when we get there. But there's going to be a lot of good options for the Sabres there. I think I'd be happy with most of these guys, honestly, Austin. I mean, if Raymond's there, Rossi, Holtz, even Perfetti, or somehow as elite prospects is projecting Tim Stützle at number 8, don't see that happening, but if that happened, that would be incredible as well. And even Lindell, who we've discussed a lot on this show, I'd be happy with basically any of those guys at this point.
Yeah, like I said, I've seen the people talking about trading the 8th overall pick this year, and the reason I'm not for it is just because I've done so much work on this draft, and this is a year where you are going to get a potential top 5, potentially even top 4 caliber player with the 8th overall pick, just because there's that many good forwards at the top end of this draft. And what do we need? Forwards.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So, guys, we're going to take our commercial break on the show today, and we're going to come back, and in the second segment of the show, we're going to discuss if the Sabres trade out of this pick, what some trade possibilities would be, and things that they would have to get back if they were to trade out of this pick, and like Austin said, pass up on one of these very talented young forwards. So we'll be right back here on the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition on the Armchair GM Sports Network. Carmine's Pizzeria Italiano, serving traditional-style Italian pizzas made with the freshest, top-quality ingredients. Loaded subs and their famous chicken wings. Winners of the Reader's Choice Diamond Award, 4 years running from Niagara this week for Best Pizza and Wings in Niagara Falls. Home of the best tray and wing combo in town for the price and quality. Open daily from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m., located on the corner of Drummond Road and Dunn Street. Available for call-ahead pickup or delivery at 905-374-4400. Make sure to like them on Facebook and view their website for their menu at carmine'spizzeria.ca. Carmine's Pizzeria Italiano. Way too good. As we all adjust to this new world that we're living in today, masks are now mandatory, and Niagara's own Custom PPE is Canada's leading face mask provider. Visit them online at customppe.ca and choose between several mask options with different colors and sizes. Add your organization, company, or team logo so you make your face masks unique. Available to purchase online 24/7 at customppe.ca and shipped within 1 week. They have the best prices and quickest turnaround in Canada, and no order is too big or too small. Also offering custom floor stickers as well as face and counter shields for your business or workplace. Visit customppe.ca and use the code ARMCHAIR at checkout for 20% off your custom or blank face mask today. Custom PPE, Canada's leading face mask provider. Attention job seekers, if you are currently looking for work in the Niagara region, you owe it to yourself to check out the services provided by the Niagara Employment Help Center, located at 6100 Thoroldstone Road, Niagara Falls, directly across from the Camisos Plaza. Their free services include resume and cover letter writing, community resource and referral information, local labor market information, job search strategies, assistance with clarifying employment training and career goals, employment counseling and job search support, second career information and registration assistance, and all their services are currently provided by appointment only. So give them a call at 905-358-0021 or visit their website at ehc.on.ca, the Niagara Employment Help Center. This Employment Ontario program is funded by the Government of Ontario. J&L Flooring is a Niagara-based specialty flooring and design company. They take great pride in providing elite customer service and support. They are a specialty flooring and decor boutique shop with a beautiful showroom, great pricing, and a wide variety and truly unique selection of products. All their products are environmentally friendly and responsibly produced, so you can feel great about your flooring choices. Their goal as a local business is to build authentic relationships based on honesty and integrity that they foster with respect and authenticity, offering unique and wide range of quality products presented by a knowledgeable and patient team. They connect with their customers to simplify the process to make their life easier and to make their homes beautiful. Visit them at 4424 Montrose Road, Niagara Falls, or find out more at jnlflooring.com. Open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. through 5 p.m., and Saturday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. 905-358-3299 J&L Flooring. The Spicy Olive Bar and Grill is located on the top of Clifton Hill and just a 5-minute walk from the majestic Niagara Falls. It is conveniently nestled in the heart of the tourist district. A family-owned and operated business, the Spicy Olive opened its doors in May of 2003 and has since been established as an authentic and unique Italian restaurant and bar. Its rustic ambiance and time-worn finishing provide a warm and inviting dining experience. Offering an array of delicious dishes, they specialize in authentic Italian cuisine, homemade sauces, fresh ingredients, and consistently providing a strong foundation on which they build their menu. As night falls, the Spicy Olive shifts to a lively lounge where drinks and live music come together to make a perfect evening. For more than 15 years, they have provided not only for their dedicated locals, but their customers from all over the world with authentic Italian food and great live entertainment. Open daily 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. for dinner and till 2 a.m. for drinks. Check out their new menu and book reservations on their website at Spicy Olive Bar and Grill, it's with an E at the end, .com, or call 905-371-2323 for reservations as well. The Spicy Olive Bar and Grill.
You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network, the Niagara region's best local source for North American sports podcasting coverage. By sports fans, for sports fans.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our final segment of today's Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition, right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network. Cappy and Austin back with you here. First segment, we went over options for the Sabres with that 8th overall pick, if they decide to keep it. Now we're going to go into a little bit of the rumors and, the fantasy booking and, the Armchair GM quote on NHL 20 franchise mode of what to do trading the picks. So, Austin, let's take a look. The article that was hot today was posted with the Calgary Flames being a possible candidate. This is by Chad Dinaminikis from expectedbuffalo.com. Posted an article saying that the Calgary Flames would be a interesting trade partner for the Buffalo Sabres if they chose to trade that draft pick. And let's quickly just talk about the Calgary Flames and what they could offer the Sabres. Obviously, yes, Johnny Gaudreau at the top of the list as a possible trade target. Obviously, he would be fantastic. But going off the rest of the list here, Sam Bennett at number 2, which is interesting as he was the other Sam available when the Sabres drafted Sam Reinhart. He ended up going 4th overall to the Calgary Flames. In between there was Leon Draisaitl, which Sportsnet loved to come out with the article of these players if they were drafted one spot ahead of where they were, and they had Draisaitl in a Buffalo jersey just to give us all, some more grief here in Buffalo to think about what would happen if we had Leon Draisaitl on this team. Moving on the rest of the list, Mark Jankowski was number 3. Andrew Mangiapane was number 4. So, Austin, what are you thinking of Calgary being a possible candidate for this 8th overall pick trade with the Sabres?
I think just trade in general, Calgary makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're going, 8th overall pick to Calgary, you want a big fish, whether, he's not in that article, but if you're trading the 8th overall pick, I'm looking for a guy like Elias Lindholm. I mean, Johnny Gaudreau would be great, but he's only got 2 more years on his contract after this. I don't know how I'd feel totally about that, but if you're trading the 8th overall pick, you have to go big game hunting. So I think a guy like Elias Lindholm would be a pretty good get if they could somehow work that out. But as I've said before, I'm not bullish on trading the 8th overall pick. I'm all for trading next year's first round pick, but just as of right now, I don't know. There has to be a pretty enticing offer for me to get excited about trading the 8th overall pick. I don't know if you remember before Botterill was fired, there was reports that they were going to try and send 8th overall to San Jose for Thomas Hertl, and I was just like, I don't know how I feel about that. But, we'll see what happens. I mean, they want to be competitive. They have to be competitive soon, and if they feel that trading the 8th overall pick is what is going to make that happen, they better get a pretty big name with a nice contract coming back in return.
Exactly. Another thing to go off of that is obviously with the COVID-19 situation, the NHL has announced that their salary cap will not be increasing next year. So if you bring in a guy that has taken on a lot of salary, I mean, the Sabres do have a ton of guys coming off the books this year, UFAs and RFAs if they choose to re-sign them. But it just seems like, you bring in a guy that's making $6 or $7 million. There's kind of a, there's a risk factor with that as, the cap's not going up, and, the Sabres cap situation hasn't been great over the years, and they've kind of been handcuffed. Botterill was never really given a chance to show what he can do with a ton of cap space, which we had talked about early on in the show, that this was his offseason to have a lot of cap space to go out and make some things work and be able to make some trades and bring in some high price guys. But it seems like with Kevin Adams, they're going to be going in the other direction with what the Pegula said. So do you think that it's even possible for them to take on a guy that's making $6 or $7 million with where their financial situation is, with the cap not going up, and with what the Pegula said about trying to find efficiencies and cuts where needed?
Yeah, I do. I totally think it's possible to take on a guy with a bigger contract like that. I mean, when you look at their contract situation, there's guys that you just know aren't coming back, like Michael Frolik, probably Jimmy Vesey, probably one of Girgensons and Larson. You just know they're not coming back. On the defensive side, you don't have Lawrence Pilot, so you don't got to worry about signing him. I mean, Montour's due a contract. He's already making 3.4. He's going to want to raise. I wouldn't be surprised if he's shipped out just to cut some money there on the defensive side. So they have some contracts that they can move out. So, if they want to bring in a legitimate top six player, I think the best bet is via trade, and they could find some guys with a $6 to $7 million cap hit, or potentially, like I mentioned earlier, a guy in a similar situation like a Dylan Strome, who is a pending restricted free agency, who Chicago just doesn't have room for. Like, there's probably some other guys out there like that. I think those are the types of players that they're going to look to bring in via trade, and the only way they can do that is if they shed some potential cap hits that they have, being guys like Montour, Ristolainen. Those are the two big ones that come out for me, because Ristolainen's making 5.4. Montour's going to want some kind of pay raise. Those two would be your best bet. If you move a guy out, you can bring a guy in. But like you said, they want to be more efficient. I don't see them bringing in a guy with a $6 to $7 million cap hit if they're not letting some money leave their organization.
Luckily, Bogosian's contract's off the books. That's a blessing that we've been waiting for years to get off the books there. But you look down the line after next year, I mean, you have to, the Rasmus Dahlin and Henry Jokiharju, their rookie contracts are done, so they're going to definitely want pay raises as well. And you've already got a lot of money invested in that decor. Like you mentioned, Ristolainen's making 5.4, Colin Miller's making 3.8, Montour's making 3.3 with a possible pay raise, Jake McCabe's making 2.8 for one more year before he's a UFA, and Lawrence Pilot, as you mentioned, is not on the books at the moment, but they've got a lot of money and capital invested in that defense, and they will going forward when Dahlin and Jokiharju's contracts are up. So can you even afford to keep this decor intact with the money that they're making right now and the improvements that they have to make up front with the salary cap not going up? It seems like one of those guys, the writing on the wall, maybe have to be moved, and you could package up one of those guys with the 8th overall pick to try and entice a team to bolster their decor and get the 8th overall pick. But you better be getting a very good top-end forward back that can be at least a second-line player for the Sabres going forward, or you cannot make that trade.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said I'm more intrigued by the proposition of packaging Colin Miller, Brandon Montour, or Rasmus Ristolainen with next year's first round pick, rather than this year's 8th overall pick. Mostly just because you trade next year's pick with all your intentions being that you're going to be competitive, and that next year's pick won't be a lottery pick. This year's pick, it's a top 8 pick. You can get a good prospect. You want that forward help. You trade next year's pick with one of your defensemen, thinking that you're going to be competitive this year, not worrying about what that pick is going to be.
And you basically have to know that you're going to be competitive next year. You kind of have to go into that mindset, or Jack Eichel might not be on this team going forward if you're not anywhere close to the playoffs once again next year. So I like that. Basically gives you we're going all in here. We're not worried about our draft pick next year because we don't have it. So we have no safety net. We're going for it. We're going to prove that we're a team to be contending for a playoff spot. And you know what, I do like that because then they were able to keep the 8th overall pick, use it. And, the Sabres have had so many draft picks over the years that if they're able to improve, I'm all for trading the draft pick, a first-round pick, if it's going to drastically improve this team now, which they need to give Jack Eichel some help on that second-line center spot to take some pressure off of him, because these teams are basically just, they're basically just lining up against the Jack line, and if they're able to shut him down, then the rest of the team is just basically gravy at that point, and it's something that needs to change, and I think Jack needs it to change as well. So I don't think the Sabres want to sit there and continue to wait for these prospects to finally, become what they are. We've been waiting for that for the last 10 years, and we've been sold on that for the last 10 years. So I think it's time for a different approach. We saw what Tim Murray tried to do with the O'Reilly and Evander Kane trades, and Robin Leonard to a lesser extent as a goalie, but I think there's a lot of forwards available, like I said, because of the cap situation. There's going to be teams wanting to get money off of their cap, so there's going to be guys that are available that maybe in other years where in a normal year without COVID going on where the cap would go up, guys that may not be available in previous years or other years might be available this year for the Sabres to take advantage in a trade like that to bring some money back from a team that just needs to shed some salary cap.
Yeah, and another thing that kind of plays into this that we haven't talked about and that Kevin Adams needs to prepare for, but also might allow him to trade for another player is Seattle. They just announced their team name. The expansion draft is coming in a year and a half, 2 years. So you're going to want to either get a player like Rasmus Ristolainen, Colin Miller, or Montour off your books so you won't have to protect them, thus exposing one of your other players. So, I mean, teams might already be thinking about that. So that could help you, identify a player like again, I keep bringing him up because the more I think about it, the more I think it would be a home run of a trade depending on the price. A guy like Dylan Strome, who you could lock down to a long-term contract because he's an RFA. You could end up shipping out one of your defensemen who you don't view as a part of your long-term future, ship out that first-round pick, and then you bring in some legitimate forward help, knowing that the other team can't afford him and can't afford to keep him in 2 years from now because there is that looming expansion draft.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point that you bring up there. And you know what? You look at what was I going to say here? You're looking at guys that are available. I mean, we saw that rumor last week that was circling about Vancouver Canucks, and apparently Brock Besser is available because they, according to this rumor, are higher on Tyler Toffoli than they are Brock Besser for whatever reason. So do you see any validity in the Brock Besser being available from Vancouver? If that's a possibility, do you see the Sabres jumping on something like that, or are you more interested in them trying to acquire a centerman at this point over a winger?
I don't know how true it would be about Brock Besser. I mean, Brock Besser's a hell of a player. If he's available, obviously I go get him. I don't even know if I'd trade 8th overall, but I definitely trade a defenseman plus next year's first for Brock Besser. But to an lesser extent, there is a player on Vancouver that I think Buffalo should be targeting, and he will not cost as much. And that's if Besser's unavailable, and that's Jake Virtanen. I think he would be an absolutely great addition. He's got some offensive capabilities. He's got some jam to him. He shouldn't be that expensive, and he could easily come in and do what the Sabres thought Michael Frolik and Jimmy Vesey was going to do, and that's be offensive while helping your penalty kill. So I do like the idea of targeting players in the similar positions like Brock Besser and Dylan Strome and Jake Virtanen, and pending RFAs who their teams might not be able to keep because of future financial commitments. Those are the players that hopefully Kevin Adams is targeting, because there is a lot of players out there that can come in and make an immediate impact on your team. Could you imagine Brock Besser in this lineup? Granted, again, we wouldn't have that second line center, but imagine Brock Besser on a line with a guy like Jack Eichel. He'd probably have a Jeff Skinner 40-goal type season. So, yeah, if he's available, try and make it work.
And then you could finally try Sam Reinhart out at center and see what you got with that. And if he doesn't, then you move on. But I think that's interesting situation with Virtanen because essentially the Canucks have a logjam at right wing at this point. You've got Toffoli, Besser, and Virtanen, essentially all right wingers at this point, and one of those guys isn't going to be happy playing third line, I don't think. So one of them might end up getting moved just for the fact that they've got way too much depth at that position, and somebody like the Sabres could jump in and take something like that. What do you think about lastly here, the Calgary Flames of Sam Bennett? I know he's obviously a top fourth overall pick in his draft year, hasn't lived up to that whatsoever. What would be your comfortability with giving up assets for Sam Bennett? Obviously, you wouldn't. I don't think you would need to give up the 8th overall pick and one of those top 4D. What would be realistic for you, and what you'd be willing to give Calgary for a guy like Sam Bennett, who has yet to prove himself as a top 6 forward in the NHL?
Yeah, that's tough because I don't really know how Calgary values Sam Bennett. I'd be totally willing to trade for Sam Bennett. I think I talked about it earlier with a guy on Twitter. I think Sam Bennett would be a really good addition for the Sabres. I mean, again, you're bringing him in to be a middle 6 forward. Just hoping that a change of scenery can help get him going, kind of like what happened with Dylan Strome. We know Sam Bennett is gifted offensively. We know he's got some grit and some nastiness to his game. So, I mean, depending on how Calgary values him, no, I don't think you would need to give up a top 4 defenseman to get a Sam Bennett. I think you could probably get away with, again, I don't know because I don't know how they value him, but I'd be willing to part with a couple mid-round picks, like a 2nd and a 4th maybe. I don't even know if it would cost that much. I don't know how Calgary views him, but he could definitely be a guy that could help the Sabres going forward, and might be, maybe, I think Calgary's starting to turn around on him again, and they like him again, but he is the perfect type of player that could use a change of scenery and could potentially jumpstart his career. And with him being a restricted free agent, Buffalo has some control over him if they were to get him.
It seems like Calgary might be making some moves, regardless of if it's with the Sabres or other teams. It seems like they're a team that's very interesting to look at and to circle as a team to make some moves this offseason when their playoff run is over. Lastly, Austin, before we wrap up the show today, is there anybody you think that, like a veteran center, like you said, like we've been mentioning, a spot gap guy, like basically just fill in the spot for Dylan Cousins to relieve some pressure from him taking over the second line center spot, that's maybe in their early to mid 30s, that you could see the Sabres trying to acquire just for 1 or 2 years remaining in their careers, just to kind of bring in a guy that could probably be cheap, making a lot of money on another team with the caps, with the cap situation, like I've mentioned many times on this show. Is there somebody, like a guy that jumps out to me as like a Jeff Carter from Los Angeles as an example of somebody that's later in their career, still making a lot of money, but could still be an effective player for a team like Buffalo, who desperately is in need of like a second line center? Do you see anybody in the league that you can think of that might be a good possibility for that, or the Sabres could take advantage of a guy that'd be able to get at a cheap price?
Yeah, I think there's 2 guys that you got to look at. One is not a center; he's a winger, but I think he would actually be really good. He'd be a sneaky good addition. He's a veteran. That's Craig Smith from the Nashville Predators. He's still got some offensive ability. He scored 18 goals this year. The other one is also a Nashville Predator, and he is a center. And we've talked about him before. He's had some really good NHL success. He's been a playoff hero for the Penguins a couple times, and that'd be Nick Bonino. I think those are 2 guys that, Nick Bonino would be a really good addition depending on the cost, because, if you could get him for like a year, maybe even 2 would be a stretch, but you could get him as a second line center for a year, then shift him down to your lineup once one of the young guys is ready. So I think those are 2 guys that could be looked at, depending on if Nashville would be willing to part with them. But those would be the 2 that I would be looking at for a veteran like that.
Yeah, and they're not even in their 30s yet, so that would be even better than expected with those guys. But it seems like Nashville has a lot of money tied up in their forward group, and they're going to need to end up moving somebody, so that would be an interesting get with, especially with their center. They've just got way too much money invested in their center ice position, so I could see them, either if they don't move a guy like Johansson, moving a guy like Bonino would be a nice filler guy for the Sabres. It wouldn't be the sexiest of ads, and Sabres fans would probably be mixed feelings about it, but you know what, to bring in a guy like him to shore up that second, third line center role, like I mean, what else do you have at this point? Marcus Johansson, who's a winger playing center. Like, come on, like. There's not really much to do, and a 19-year-old Dylan Cousins coming in, or whoever they pick with the 8th overall pick, or Casey Middlestat finally figuring it out. Like, the options just aren't, the other options just aren't realistic and aren't good options. So a guy like Nick Bonino is an option, and you know what? I keep going back to a guy like Jeff Carter because I think the LA Kings are obviously in a rebuild. If they could get a guy like Jeff Carter's contract off the books and maybe they eat some of his salary and the Sabres are able to give him, you know, like a mid-round draft pick for him or a low-range prospect, I think the Kings would jump all over that just to get his salary off the books as they're kind of transitioning into their rebuild here. So I would be okay with the Sabres acquiring an older center like that, kind of like what the Leafs did with Jason Spezza, although he's in like a fourth-line role now. But I would love to even get a guy like Jeff Carter, even though he's on the basically the tail end of his career. The Sabres just need somebody like that to fill that second, third line center role that we've talked about since the trade deadline show back, seems like a year ago, but it wasn't that long ago. But it just seems like they just need to fill that spot with a reliable guy who is known in this league that can play the center ice position and relieve Jack Eichel of all the pressure of playing center on this team.
Yeah, and you know, I'll plug Bonino one more time because I'm looking at his stuff. He only makes $4.1 million, and he's a UFA at the end of 2020, 2021. So if they traded for him, they'd have 1 year with him. That's literally the definition of a stopgap. So I think, you know, Nick Bonino could be an absolutely ideal target for the Sabres if they decide to go for the stopgap route. I'm still going to say swing for the fences and try and get Dylan Strome, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I'm going to plug Jeff Carter one more time. $5.2 million for the next 2 years after this year at 35 years old. So maybe we'll make a poll about that. If you're for you Sabres fans out there, we're going to make a poll if you want to go with Austin's option of Nick Bonino or my option of Jeff Carter. We'll see what the fans say about that. I'm sure they'll probably be more towards your side, but you know what? I think both options are good, and if the Sabres are thinking of that route, then I'm already happy that they're thinking of something like that because that's exactly what they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll see. We'll see what Kevin Adams does. I mean,
yep.
You can't really go wrong. I mean, you can go wrong, but if you're looking at a stopgap or a potential, you know, pending RFA, I think those are the two best options. Don't do what Botterill did and sign a winger and try and make him your second line center. But who knows? We'll see what happens.
I guess
long time till the offseason.
Yeah, Dylan Strome will be the best case scenario in that. But the Sabres have had so long. I'm sure they're going over every option, and hopefully they make the right decision. When we come back on here for another podcast, we could be talking about a good decision that the team has made instead of all the negativity that we've had to talk about. Feels like since this podcast started and for the last decade with this team. So I'm interested to see what the Kevin Adams era brings and what he's going to bring to the team. We'll have to wait and see, but wait for another episode until we get some more Sabres news, maybe some hires, maybe something goes on with the team. But as of now, we're probably going to have to wait until that draft board gets released, and we can talk about all the possible draftees for the Sabres with all of their picks. So I'm really looking forward to that and having some of your buddies from the Charging Buffalo come on as well as some guests. So big things to come from this show going forward into the next season, and I'm really looking forward to it with where the direction of this team is hopefully going.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, hopefully, not hopefully, because we're going to be able to do it once all the draft stuff is finalized. We'll be able to have a really in-depth show. We'll have some good information. I mean, like I said, I've been working hard on this year's draft. You know, a couple of my buddies from the Charging Buffalo were working on a draft guide, so we're pretty deep into this draft class. And you and me having some OHL watching experience, we have some opinions on some guys that could be helpful in the later rounds. So a lot of good stuff coming up soon, and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. But as far as today's episode, guys, that's going to wrap it up for our episode of the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition, right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network, your source for North American sports coverage by sports fans, for sports fans, delivered to you right here from the Niagara region. As always, I'm one of your hosts of this show, Cappy. You can follow me on Twitter at Caputs13, the Canadian Z, and you can follow my co-host Austin at Austin_Broad as well. Check out his articles on thechargingbuffalo.net. Great stuff there, Austin. Always a pleasure having you on, man.
Always a pleasure being on with you, Brand. Hopefully soon again.
Yeah, exactly. And a big thank you to all of our great sponsors who help put us on, support the network, keep the show on the air, especially during these hard and difficult times with COVID-19. And finally to you viewers out there for tuning in and listening along with us for this episode. And this has been the Niagara Lowdown Sabres edition on the Armchair GM Sports Network, by sports fans, for sports fans. Enjoy the playoffs, guys. Sabres aren't in it. We'll enjoy our golfing, and we'll be back to talk more Sabres in the near future. We'll see you guys next episode.
See you guys soon.